the way that we talk about politics these days doesn't really resemble the way that I remember it growing up. The discourse is a lot more, it feels more religious in nature, apocalyptic.
I'm Nathan Maharaj, and this is Kobo in Conversation. My guest is the novelist Jon Hickey, author of Big Chief. It takes place in an Anishinaabe reservation called Passage Rouge Nation during the last weekend before a tribal presidential election. Incumbent President Mac Beck is coasting to another term, happily overseeing tribal governmental matters as well as the Golden Eagle Casino and Hotel when his rival, activist Gloria Hawkins, begins gaining steam in the home stretch. Gloria's campaign, by the way, is being run by Mac's estranged sister Layla, while his own campaign is run by his childhood friend and local boy made good in law school, Mitch Caddo, who, by the way, seems to have almost had a thing with Layla back when they were kids. It is a tangled web, but I cannot wait to pick at some of it with its author. Jon Hickey, welcome to Kobo.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here. That sounds like a good book.
It's a great book. You should read it.
Yeah, it sounded real exciting there. Yeah, yeah.
As I said in the intro, this whole story is set in a place called Passage Rouge Nation, which I understand to be fictional.
It's a fictional place, yes.
So, with all those caveats in place, was there a model that you had in mind for creating this place?
I think widely the model was nations around Indian country, as it's known,
Yeah.
reservations. My people come from the Lac du Flambeau Reservation up in northern Wisconsin. But when you're in the area of Minnesota, Wisconsin, you're familiar with a few of the other nations as well. Bad River, Menominee, White Earth,
Hmm.
Red Lake. It's I have a place in mind, but it really is an amalgamation of all of those places.
I understand you live in San Francisco now.
I live in San Francisco.
I wonder how being so physically removed from northern Wisconsin um, allows you to gain some perspective on telling a story set in a kind of archetypical place like Passage Rouge Nation.
I've heard it said, that you really have to leave home, before you can write about it. I don't know. It seems like a famous quote, and I'm completely duffing who said it. Uh,
We can say it's an old proverb, and then
an old proverb,
it's an
yeah,
old
an old
proverb.
wisdom. Yeah, Shakespeare. Yeah. And I've been in San Francisco for 16 years, and I felt like, I mean, I have family that's there. My parents just moved back to Flambeau,
Mm.
and but I would always hear about things that were going on there, certain things that were happening politically with the elections over there, and feel a sort of powerlessness because I couldn't be there to actually participate in it, to vote in it.
Mhm.
And yet, these are things that do affect me, and they affect me. They affect my two boys, who are citizens of the nation as well. Um, and there's this sort of feeling of powerlessness, of being that disconnected, that made it feel more active to write about it and to let my imagination live in this space.
Mhm.
So yeah, the distance was definitely in a way inspirational.
Mhm.
Um, it was like a feeling of empowerment, I guess,
Mhm.
because I just can't be there
Yeah.
as often as I'd like.
So as I said in the intro, Mitch Caddo
Mhm.
is the protagonist of this book. Mitch is a lawyer. He works as a fixer for tribal president Mac Beck. Tell me about telling the story from his perspective.
I identify with Mitch's disconnection first and foremost.
Mm.
I think that he was my way into the story because um, I feel that same disconnection. I feel that same maybe out of placeness.
Mm,
And as the book begins ostensibly about politics, but it becomes about much more than just who wins the election. It's about finding that sense of belonging.
yeah.
So just practically speaking, that was my way into the story. So I just followed that thread. And the book, I think, became to me about who belongs,
Hmm.
right? Who is allowed to claim this heritage. And Mitch is an outsider. Mitch has lived there, very briefly when he was a kid, but is coming back as essentially a stranger,
Hmm.
which is how I often feel when I go back to Flambeau. That's where my thinking was at with that.
His distance from the community, his that sense of unbelonging, it's a manifold thing. You didn't just give him one kind of frayed tether. You gave him several.
Yeah,
One of them is as a lawyer, he's got this set. I mean, his education puts him aside from his education and his experience culturally.
yeah,
He's also we learned very early on he is white passing, which is to say,
yeah,
you wouldn't know to look at him that you might find him in the employ and enrolled among the members of an indigenous reservation.
yeah.
Tell me about those layers, about those multiple frayed tethers.
Yeah, the characters in the book are initially, anyway, very concerned with the surfaces
Yeah,
and how one might use the iconography or just like the visual cues of being indigenous.
yeah.
And there's a premium on that outward show of it.
There's political gain to be made from it too. That's
Definitely.
remarked on pretty significantly in the that there are segments of the electorate that can be
Yeah.
courted with the appropriate I can't remember what cynical term you used for it, but a performative indigeneity.
Yes, yes, a persona, that you say the right things, you wear the beaded medallion,
Yeah,
the ribbon shirt, that there are these sort of visual cues that might, give the impression that you're um super Indian. Yeah.
yeah. Talk like
And
Graham Greene, like
you
yeah,
talk like Graham Greene, yeah, that voice, such an iconic voice. Um and Mitch, the narrator is definitely not that. Like the visual side of it, he's not, and he's very aware of it, and he's aware that if he even tried, it would be put on. It would seem unnatural. Um, and yeah, so that's one element of disconnection is just that visual sort of thing. The other is the family. He
mhm,
doesn't really have family anymore. His mother has died. She was the citizen of the nation his father is absent. Um, and the extended family is all gone. So like that, those tethers are gone. Um, but I think that it's the mindset and the spiritual void that he feels because he doesn't have, let's say, a moral center that is from there, from that culture. And that lack, that void is so palpable, maybe not to him as much, he's not able to quite articulate it, maybe in the beginning.
yeah,
By the end, he's working towards that, being able to define that. But yeah, those are as I understand them, those are like the three main tethers that have
yeah.
been cut, so that keep him disconnected. His solution to repairing those tethers is to essentially take over the government, right? And it was
Well,
very drastic. I don't identify with that part. I mean, yeah.
yeah, no, few people with those kinds of ambitions end up making a proper go of being a novelist. That's true.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I don't think it ends up being a happy ending either.
Yeah.
But that's where we start.
I noted as I was reading that we don't hear another character refer to Mitch by name until we're a bunch of chapters in,
Yeah.
and it's Gloria, his political rival or the rival of his employer, Mac Beck. Gloria being the other candidate, um, and she says it because she believes him to be in the employ of quote the current tribal president.
Mhm.
Another character refers to him, Reed, calls Mitch J. Crew Indian, which is great.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
poetic in what it gets across in so few syllables.
yeah, yeah,
But Reed's father, Wabish, who's one of the community's elders, he calls Mitch by his Anishinaabe name, Mishki Gabo.
yeah,
Mitch is such an interesting character in this way that he is viewed by others and has a tough time seeing himself.
yeah.
I thought of I don't know. I was trying to think of a literary antecedent for this. Was there one you had in mind?
Certainly. The book began as a sort of homage to All the King's Men
Oh,
by Robert Penn Warren.
yep.
Yeah, great book. I mean, just, I lived inside that book for a while. So I wanted to, I believe they're spiritual cousins
Huh.
in many ways. And I wanted to nod the head, tip of the hat,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So there's probably a few Easter eggs in the book that are meant as an homage to that work. Um, but I think that what you're getting at, in my mind as I was writing, is Invisible Man,
Hmm.
Ralph Ellison,
Hmm.
uh, and uh, that guy doesn't even get a name.
He doesn't know.
Yeah, yeah,
No.
yeah.
I think of him as Joe because of Joe Morton's incredible narration of the audiobook. But yeah, yeah,
Right.
Ralph Ellison has his protagonist is without a name.
So Martin's so great in that audiobook. I
Yeah.
I just recently I listened to it, and it's incredible. But in relation to Big Chief, um, Mitch is pushing away his sense of culpability, and that he knows that what he's doing is underhanded. He feels justified in his actions, but he knows that. Um, he is culpable for something, and he is hiding, and he's evasive about it. And it's when people do start calling him by his name and by
Mm,
the his Anishinaabe name as well, where he's starting to recognize that he is not able to extricate himself from blame or for answering for these things, that he is part of this world, and that he does have an effect. He's not just some guy sitting in the shadows. Like he is, um, he's in it.
mm,
And as much as he, it's sort of a comfortable thing to not be recognized, to be J. Crew Indian, just the smiling face with the nice clothes and the fancy vocabulary. Uh, when they start calling him by his name, is when things start getting real, and he's I think draws him back into the reality of the situation.
Another character I thought of as you were talking about culpability and the desire to be at a remove was Nick Carraway,
Great Gatsby.
right? Another one of those great narrators who wants the audience, wants the reader to see them as completely apart from these people that they're so close to passing judgment on,
Yeah,
but but we can see how dirty they are.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm very glad you mentioned that as well. That's definitely always in the back of my mind. And the reason why I go back to Gatsby, is partially what you're pointing out. Just the effect of that first person narrator. Um, but also like on maybe like a more meta level is that I reread the Great Gatsby every 4 years or so.
Mm.
I guess presidential cycles.
Yeah.
um, but every time I read it, it means something slightly different, right? That I fasten on something else
Yeah.
brand new, and I think the last time I read it, I was really fascinating on when Nick actually meets Gatsby for the first time. at the party. He doesn't know his name. He's just like talking, with this, with this guy, and there's this sort of moment of falling in love with the stranger at the party. Um, and I was just like, I don't know how I just passed over that. How many times have I read this book? But like just that the very first moment that they meet and just how it just knocks you over. Like you realize eventually that it is Gatsby, but you yourself as the reader have fallen in love with this character as well. Um, but yeah, it's definitely
Yeah.
definitely in there.
So we've been dancing around this a little bit, but the what Mitch is culpable for is uh is one of the most reprehensible things I could think of that somebody in charge of an indigenous reservation could do, which is Mac Back has been pretty free-handed about disenrolling people. Um,
Mhm.
can you explain a little bit for listeners for whom that's not hitting quite hard enough? What is enrollment and disenrollment? Why does it matter here?
It is. I have a hard time finding anything else that comes close to, if you want to injure somebody's identity, the thing that, that's so essential to them. And um, I mean, part of the book is exploring the absurdity of some of these ideas that,
Mm,
that you can be determined to be indigenous, just by tribal affiliation, by blood quantum, and all of these things go back to, termination policies of the U.S. government, that this is by design. Um, Disenrolling is stripping somebody of their citizenship. And it's done in, yeah, a lot. There have been a lot of tribes in the last few years that have done this. They go into the enrollment records and they decide that, okay, this person wasn't actually part of the tribe, so then a whole branch, everybody's descendants gets,
mhm,
cut off. And when you look into it, uh, more often than see that how it's used as a political tool, a political weapon. There you can limit the amount of people that are getting per capita checks. If you can eliminate like political rivals, that way you can make them ineligible for office, making them ineligible to actually be on the reservation.
mhm.
And Yeah, there are any number of uh, reasons one might do this, but like I said, a lot of the time um, it's political, um, and people use this, and this has been something that's been going on for a few years now. The other mechanism, the other instrument they have is banishment on the reservation, and because there's a legal gray area about jurisdiction on reservations, who gets to charge crimes,
Mhm.
who how do you adjudicate these things? Um, a lot of tribes will banish somebody from the reservation boundaries. They're just not allowed to be there. Um, and Yeah, this, like I said, I think there are a few things that get to the heart of somebody's, identity or their sense of self than their belongingness to a nation. Um, and as you point out, yeah, Mitch and Mac did not invent disenrollment, but they certainly carried it on, and they certainly adopted it as for their own purposes.
Yeah, and it's as we talked about Mitch and his feeling of not belonging, uh, for him to visit that formally upon others, just really, it really is striking. It makes him a hard character to spend time with.
Yeah,
Let's talk about Mac. Let's talk about Mac Beck, who,
yeah.
um, it would be easy to as we describe Mac Beck for someone to think, oh, this person they're talking about, that must be the big chief. It's not the big
Mhm.
chief. We need to make a note here. The
Yeah,
big
yeah,
chief of the novel is a car. It's a
Mhm.
pretty awesome car, but it's a car.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
of course transports Mac back everywhere. So you're not totally off base by thinking that. But let's talk about Mac back. Who is this guy? This guy who has power, wants it, and really is pretty okay doing whatever he's got to do to hold on to it.
Mac was a surprise, a very pleasant surprise as I was writing it. I think in the earlier drafts, there was a character that was in the periphery a little bit, and he was Joe's son still. Joe is the general counsel of the tribe, a white man who has kind of insinuated himself into the business of the tribe, and his adopted son is Mac. And he was a sort of Fredo Corleone sort of character for a little bit. He's maybe a little goofy, not very serious, maybe not super adept at the whole political game. Um, but every time I went back to the draft, he insisted upon getting a little bit more page time.
Yeah.
And there came a point where I was like, this guy's serious. This guy has a serious presence. He's really, really, first of all, he's really big. I think I make that point in the first chapter. Um, but but also there is this ambition that he has. There is this sense of injury, that he's resentful towards his adopted father. He's resentful towards the people in the reservation who have also made him feel like an outsider in many ways. Um, he's carrying a lot of the psychic weight. And when he gets into power, he just naturally grabs onto it and holds onto it. But I just knew that he was going to be a major player in the book because, every time he opened his mouth, he had something fun to say. I don't know. And he throws his weight around. I mean, he's a very dynamic guy, and he's the opposite side of the coin of Mitch. Mitch, who tries to hide. He's the man behind the curtain. He's not as big. It's his alter ego in a lot of ways. Um, so yeah, uh, Mac really is the dynamic focus of the book. But it is funny, like we were talking about culpability, is that he doesn't seem to be getting the blame as much as like Mitch is. We attribute these things to Mitch, but Mac is also in on this.
Yeah, yeah. The blame lands on the fixer, on the lawyer,
Yeah,
because he's using because they're using mechanisms of law.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
uh, I do want to like I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I have to ask about the big chief, about the car,
yeah.
because I
Yeah.
need to know
Yeah.
where that showed up in the many drafts and revisions.
Um, I don't even remember. It's one of those things that just seems so natural to the book, that I mean, it was always a Ford F-350. And I feel like, in a rural woods sort of place, the pickup truck is important and selection of pickup truck. I'm not going to come down on the debate of Ford versus Chevy.
No, we and heaven forbid anybody brings up Dodge. Like that's not.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't even. But Mac has definitely fallen on the Ford side of things. This is a book about people that are very concerned with the visual and the outward appearance of things, and Mac has chosen the biggest, heaviest, most bulletproof visual symbol to ride around in. um, and has it on his license plate, Big Chief, and then we put that, that outdated sort of term, the Big Chief, meant to be a little provocative,
Yeah,
that like, playing around with, an old stereotype, but like just, owning it,
yeah.
slapping it onto the license plate of a big giant truck and daring somebody to say something.
Well, Mac really embraces the performativity of it all too. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
Mac would be very okay with someone thinking he's a big chief, calling him, "Hey, big chief."
Yeah.
Like he's very at ease with. He just naturally looks the part.
Yeah.
That as he comes across in the book, and he's very comfortable looking the part.
Yeah.
He's he's at once kind of a scary character, and there's also like a sadness to that hollowness because
Yeah.
I feel like what he and Mitch share is that they are both kind of empty on the inside, and neither one really knows.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you hit it right there. I know that Mitch is feeling the spiritual void, and he doesn't have a way to define it in the beginning. And it becomes more defined throughout the thing. But Mac is also, suffering from the same. Um, it's like being poisoned,
Mm,
and what they've replaced it with is power. They've replaced it with, the ambition to hold on to this power. Um, and that was one of the surprises, is the discovery as I went through, because it would have been easy to keep Mac as this sort of cartoon character, big guy talking tough,
mm,
and um, but as I kind of discovered the motivations and the fears and the resentments, and there's a case to be made, um, that there's some justification in the way that he carries himself through the world.
mm.
Um, that was a surprise to me as I was writing it, but I think a realistic sort of thing. As I started to see him more as a human rather than just a character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does he become in the writing something of a comment on who would seek the kind of power that he's seeking, on what it would take? Kind of, I was talking with my kids about this the other day of like, are there good US presidents? Are there bad ones? Well, listen, like there's
Right.
kind of got to be something wrong with you to want to be president in the first place.
I often think that. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
is that part of was that part of putting Mac together? Is like how is his psychology broken that he believes he should hold this power?
I think I had a similar conversation with my oldest son. We were talking about, villains and heroes, and I caught myself saying something like, there are no villains out there. There's not like villains out there. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe there are. You look at the political situation, without going too far into the weeds on this, that the pathologies are so nakedly out there.
Hmm.
The resentments, you can see it. It's very raw, and I do have that suspicion that, in order to get to that point where you're putting yourself in front of people and creating a persona that's, marketable politically, that it's attempting to fulfill some sort of need, or some sort of void, um, and in a way that was meant as a comment of that the way that we talk about politics these days, doesn't really resemble the way that I remember it growing up.
Mm,
The discourse is a lot more. Um, it feels more religious in nature,
mm,
apocalyptic, and it's not as even, or measured. I mean, it was bad back then too.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was,
yeah.
but just the way that we interact and discourse about it, has taken on this sort of, um, religious overtone that, might be underlying, like, or suggesting some sort of moral or spiritual void.
Mm, yeah,
um and yeah, I don't know, I probably believe that about, people in office, that that there's trying to fulfill something.
yeah,
In
yeah.
the book, Mitch is trying to fulfill that spiritual, the missing part of himself, the thing that not only he doesn't have, but he feels has been kept from him. which sort of fuels that resentment, which makes it just even more poisonous, in the
Yeah.
beginning. Over time, my hope, I don't know, I felt when I was writing the book was that he was discovering a way to listen, that he could, emerge from that spiritual poisoning. So even if we don't reach that level of redemption, that that we have at least the possibility or a direction. um I feel like that was a very long way of answering your question.
We love long ways of answering questions on the show.
Great.
It's the only way to answer a question.
Yeah.
Talking about power, because
Mm.
this is a book about the weekend leading up to an election.
Yeah.
The power that's available, that the share of power that's being fought over here in this contest, it's not it's not at the front of anyone's mind, but it does come up that this power only exists by the grace of the U.S. government. That this is a share of a larger power structure that they're fighting for,
Mhm.
and it's only because this larger force allots it that it even exists. And we get little hints of that. There's a sustained note of that with the FBI investigation that's going on. That whatever
Yeah.
you're doing, whatever's going on in quote unquote Indian country is fine unless.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me about that power structure, about that almost like a Venn diagram of power, because it does
Yeah.
map onto this belonging theme we've been talking about. In that the locus of the reservation is so primary, and it does cast everything beyond it as alien and weird, but that's where the real power sits.
Yeah. Um, well, it's a subject that's fascinating to me, and I think that it's one of those frontiers of study,
Mm,
is how reservations and these nations fit within the context of their relations with the federal government, because they are peers, right? By treaty, the government entered these treaties with nations, right?
yeah,
Not with small towns or just communities or tribes, but this is recognized as like this is a sovereign entity. And because of that, there's a sort of power multiplier, because we are talking about essentially a small town,
yeah,
right? The population is, we're talking thousands of people, and not
yeah.
hundreds of thousands of people
Is it
necessarily.
3,000? Does that come up?
Yeah, that's where, yeah.
Yeah,
Passage Rouge, the fictional nation, is about 3,000. And so everything's really, really small,
yeah,
but it also, if you look at the tribes around here, the tribes that I know, the nations that I know up in Wisconsin and Minnesota, uh, how often do they end up in federal case law? How often do they end up in front of the Supreme Court? That the things that happen on these reservations have great importance about just the government. We're intertwined with the American government inextricably.
mhm,
Um, the One of the original sins of the country is manifest destiny, right? We define each other in that sort of way. That their obligation is it kind of comes from those sorts of things. Um, and that's why everything's so important. That's why they want that power so much. It's the power of the interactions with the government. It's the power of stewardship over the land. It's the power of direction of a whole culture, a language, all of these things. And when I see that in the real world, I'm just fascinated, because nobody's really, really talking about it. Um, and like, it just seems like there's so much there, so much importance there. And it's just kind of ignored. And again, this is why I'm surprised that other people haven't really, delved into it as much as, like Louis Erdrich.
yeah.
So we've got a couple of books, great books, The Roundhouse and the Night Watchman. Um, where we start like kind of exploring that as an idea. Um, but other than that, there's not a whole lot out there.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's the like the expression of one foot in each canoe kind of
Yeah,
as Mitch has that, but the way you've drawn him is not it's not a cultural divide. It's not, oh, I'm white passing, was raised off the reservation, culturally he has these dual belongings. His dual belongings are in these power structures because he's trained as a
yeah.
lawyer. He is trained in how in the mechanisms of power.
Yeah, it's certainly though, there are two languages that he recognizes, one that he can speak and one that he can't, and one of them is the legal speak,
Mm,
the language of the law, and the other one is an Anishinaabe, which is the Anishinaabe language,
mm,
and he recognizes the power in both of those languages, but he adopts one, and that's the path that he chooses, and that's the path that he's on in the beginning of the book.
mm.
That he's trying to capture that power through that language rather than the language of his people.
I found throughout the book, there's a sense of creeping dread I had that I
Mm.
wasn't quite able to put my finger on. But I was like, I'm enjoying this book. Why is it scaring me? Maybe it was a little bit that Mac Beck was reminding me of like one or two Stephen King villains that were like an oversized guy willing to do anything and holding a lot of political power. I thought, yeah, this is a little bit Stephen King country, but there's something else that was bothering me. And
Mhm.
what I realized it was towards the end was that it was that you tell the story so tightly focused. Your aperture is focused on these few days leading up to the election, but it's also so tightly focused on the reservation, such that you get a couple hundred pages in, and the idea of disenrollment goes from being a technicality that we're learning about to the equivalent of banishment off the edge of the world, because the book
Yeah,
doesn't take us off the reservation. So the idea that one would be disenrolled, that one would be banished, is to be wiped out of existence.
yeah, yeah.
I just wonder about the aperture setting that you had on that you keep us right on the map, right inside there. I always wonder about earlier drafts when I have thoughts like this. Was there ever a time where we went a little broader, where we maybe got into the FBI investigation happening back wherever that may have originated? Or was it was always going to be right there through the election?
I'm loving the aperture comment there. It really hits it. And the Stephen King. Now that you mention it, going back to my teenage years of reading Stephen King stories, where they're stuck in this small town,
Yeah.
and they realize they can't actually escape. That they can't get out of the Children of the Corn town,
Yeah. There's
or
this malevolence that will not let them leave.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You go down the road and there's no road there, that sort of thing. Um, I will not discount the possibility that I'm wearing my influences there. Um, in previous drafts, the first draft that I handed to my agent was very long, and it was maybe more linear in terms of the rise and fall of Mac Beck,
Mm,
the young tribal president. Um, and it was intercut with these interstitial chapters taking place during a reelection campaign.
mm,
And when I handed that to my agent, wonderful, wonderful agent, she said, "Love it, but it needs to be shorter." And I said, "How much shorter?" I think it was about 140,000 words, something, or 130,000 words. I don't want to inflate it too much. But she said, yeah, it probably needs to be cut by 25%.
mm.
And when I went back, she didn't give me any other instructions. She just said, make it shorter. And what I realized was that the actual urgency um, of the narrative was in that reelection campaign. And so I basically reformatted the whole thing to make it happen just during this one weekend. And I think in the previous draft, you might have seen Mitch in Washington.
Mm.
um, a little bit. You might have seen him in New York a little bit, Milwaukee. We were a little bit more far-ranging, but I think that the not quite accidental, but maybe unintended effect of limiting it to this one weekend is that there is this claustrophobia and this sense, that later on there's a very, very important scene in the book that relies on the isolation of the reservation, to get the intended effect. And that could only come, from that claustrophobic feeling. So I think it became intuitive once the scope of time of the book became so circumscribed.
Yeah. I mean, it does move urgently. I did find it like if anybody's listening to this and thinking, "Oh, 140,000 words." No, no, no. This is a tight
No,
book. This is
no.
the final product. The
Yeah.
final product moves and the
Well, we had
stakes
to
kind of
get
keep
there.
keep raising, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we had to get to that point where it was moving, and what is funny is that those are those scenes that, the book is filled with scenes that took weeks and weeks and weeks to write,
Yeah.
and there are scenes where it took days, and I always feel like if something goes too fast, that I suspect it, because like I didn't put as much in there, but those are the places that my agent and my editor were like, "Oh, this is great. This is
Yeah.
like moving really, really good." And it's getting there. And I'm like, "Oh man, that I didn't, um, all these other scenes that took months, to
Yeah.
get just right, and then there are these other things that didn't take nearly as long, and those are the ones that people are excited about.
Yeah.
It's a humbling moment for a writer, I think.
I think every artist has to at some point reckon with that like mastery should feel easy and everything else is like you're making it too hard on yourself. Like
Yeah.
like you Keith Richards looks like he's barely trying because he's figured out how to sound amazing by barely trying. And that's the magic trick.
Yeah, yeah. Richard Yates, in one of the novels, it starts with somebody talking about how, the mark of mastery is making something difficult look simple.
Yeah.
I always like
Yeah.
that idea.
But I guess the revelation then is that one can grow up thinking, oh, you're supposed to make it look simple, which means like it's supposed to be a well-written thing. So it's like easy to
Yeah,
read. And I think what Yates, I think his real insight might have been like, no, no, like while I watch you do it, it should look like ease. It should look like
yeah,
fluid and flowing. Like,
yeah, and yeah. So often, yeah, it's just that humbling thing where just um as an artist, it's hard to have that objective view of actually when you're hitting and when you're not.
yeah, yeah,
And you subscribe to certain beliefs when you're younger about, like things need to be suffered in order for them to have value. And that's not entirely true, or not as true as you think when you're younger.
yeah. I have one more question. And you don't have to answer it because well, you'll see why you don't have to answer it. If you had to cast your ballot, if you had to
Uh,
cast your ballot for president of Passage Rouge Nation, would you be voting for Mac Beck, Gloria Hawkins, a write-in candidate? I mean, it's a secret ballot, so as I say, you don't have to answer, but I had to ask.
uh, what a wonderful question. I'd probably write in Reed as a sort of as a chaos sort of thing. I think
Oh,
Reed's maybe on the more radical spectrum of things, but um, I think that everybody in the book has their justification, and everybody in the book is attempting to do right by the people of Passage Rouge. I think they all sincerely believe that, and whether that's true or not is another thing. But um, uh, I was writing a book about politics. I was trying not to be didactic. I was trying not to present like, here's, this awful power hungry man, and, uh, give a good alternative. I mean, Gloria's a good candidate, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I wonder sometimes about her dedication to the community as much. Um, but yeah, if I'm doing pure chaos, I'm going with Reed. I think
Oh,
it'd be
well,
good. I think it'd be fine. I don't know.
look, he'd be a change. He'd be a fresh breeze.
Yeah, well, no, that's never backfired on us at all.
Oh, oh,
Not recently or anything like that.
oh
But
my God.
yeah.
We're,
Now I want to take it back. Can I take?
there's no take backs.
There are no takebacks. That's what we're learning. So
Jon, thank you so much for joining us.
this was wonderful. Thank you so much, and wonderful questions, and very excited to be talking the book with you.
I have been speaking with novelist Jon Hickey, author of Big Chief. Find it and all of the books we spoke about. There's so many books we spoke about at kobo.com/conversation. There's going to be a link in the show notes. Subscribe in your podcast player. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoyed this one, tell somebody who makes you feel like you belong. Kobo in Conversation was produced this time around and hosted by me, Nathan Maharaj. Thank you for listening.